Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at a recent interview that Redpill78 and TruReporting did with an individual by the name of John. He calls himself John Here to Help. And the reason I'm doing this is because, number one, people's emotions are everywhere about this. Either they're super scared and nervous, some people are excited, so it's like a lot of people don't know what to think about this. And number two, there are some crazy claims that were said in this interview. Apparently, John had claimed he worked for intelligence circles in the past, worked on some very deep black projects, and also said a lot of stuff about the deep state, trying to control the world with different technologies and dimensional physics talk. I mean, there's a lot said, some pretty heavy stuff, okay? Now, the problem is that I'm seeing people share this with zero thought behind it. It's like, oh, here's this person who claims to be an insider and they're saying some words I've heard before, so it must be true, share. And that's not how it works, folks. A big part of waking up is honing your discernment skills. And when people tend to hear sensational stuff, it becomes emotional for them. They get tied into believing it for whatever reason, and they don't go through that discernment process. So my effort here is to do that proper journalism. So what I went ahead and did this morning is that I listened to the whole interview and I wrote down different quotes that were said, different allegations that I've got some questions about. So we're going to go through that, but before I get into this, I first want to preface this by saying that this bears nothing on Redpill78 and TruReporting, okay? I think they are fantastic channels. I've called into both of their channels before. I think they do great work, and they're very well-intentioned dudes, so don't shoot the messenger with this one. I'm definitely not shooting the messenger. I still support them. My point here is to just discern what's being said. So I'm taking what was claimed and putting that against my knowledge base, the research I've done, the conversations I've had, and also information that's out there in the public domain. Because in going through this interview and listening to what was said, there's a lot of discrepancies that I noticed, and that's why I just got questions. You know, I'm not throwing this out in the trash, but I'm not 100% believing it and sharing it like it's the truth. So let's take a breath, take a sec, and study this stuff. Now, getting into this, we're just going to do it chronologically here. You know, I have some of the timestamps of things that were said if you want to go double check it. But the first few minutes, the first about 5 minutes of this interview was really John giving his background. He said that he worked in military intelligence. He also specified civilian intelligence and said that he has a background in science. He also said that when he was younger, he designed and tested encryption algorithms on satellites. He did that before college. He built satellites, then he went into the military and worked in the intelligence field towards the end, and then apparently became a minister, I guess, once he got out. Now, that's all we really have to go off of in this interview, okay? No more details were really given about his background, which, me personally, I would have liked a bit more to establish some more credibility with this individual. Like, he could have specified what specific sciences or scientists that he's researched, you know, what college, what military branch, what intelligence service. Now, I get somebody might not want to dox themselves and put all sorts of personal information out there, but when we have an insider that's claiming some of the things that this dude claimed in this talk, that credibility is important, all right? So, a few things I have on that. Then we get into about minute 5 to we'll go down to minute 10 here, okay? Sort of the next section of this interview. Then he starts getting into some of the work that he claimed to do on different projects and a little bit of dimensional science talk. Few things I found weird about that. At about minute 5, he said that he had ties to Project Looking Glass, and he even quickly said he worked on Project Looking Glass. Then he said Project Looking Glass was working on time, and it was an offshoot of zero-point energy research that was related to quantum physics. I'm going to stop there. A couple things on this. Project Looking Glass. According to the publicly available sources that we have, putting together the picture as to what Project Looking Glass was, I know tons of people out there have done videos on that in recent weeks after Q mentioned it. But Project Looking Glass was done back in the 70s. That's our best guess, like the late 70s, early 80s, around that time frame. That was quite a while ago, okay? And Project Looking Glass, if any projects are still going on, I would venture to guess they are, but if any projects are still going on that are similar to Project Looking Glass or working on that type of tech, you can be guaranteed that they're not called Project Looking Glass anymore. The PLG that we're talking about was done back, decades ago. And then saying that it's an offshoot of zero-point energy research, not really the case. Project Looking Glass, yes, was working with time viewing, essentially, but to say it's an offshoot of zero-point energy research, that is like a huge stretch. It's a very vague statement that doesn't really go together. And then also saying it's related to quantum physics. It's also a very weird thing because a lot of what's out there in the mainstream scientific domain in regards to quantum physics, I think is bunk. I think it's garbage, dead end. And I think that's why the standard model of physics and the standard quantum physics models out there, they can't reconcile because there's misinformation in both that scientists don't realize. So there's just some odd statements here that were said that, I would like to know more about that particular science background that gives him this worldview. And then moving on, he says the timeline is converging into another dimension close to us. Very weird, because in my study of the true physics of space and time and dimensionalities, that statement really makes no sense. I do a lot of study into, of course, Nikola Tesla, Walter Russell, and them, but also a lot of study into Dewey B. Larson, okay? Dewey B. Larson was a physicist. I've done videos on my channel before. I even mentioned him briefly when I did my Project Looking Glass video recently. Dewey B. Larson was an engineer in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who did some incredible research in creating what was basically a theory of everything. He called it the reciprocal systems theory, and according to him, space and time are reciprocals. They're not separate from each other. They're very much linked, as we often hear, all points in space and time are connected. Well, that's because space and time are reciprocals of each other. And we also, if we're going to talk dimensions, we exist in multiple dimensions at once. This is something I often tweet about, I often say, is that people are out there thinking that this physical reality is different from like the interdimensional reality or whatever nomenclature they particularly use, when you got to understand we exist in a physical and a metaphysical realm at the same time. We exist in space-time, or the physical realm. It's where our bodies are, our meat suits, and then we also exist in a spiritual realm, metaphysical realm, or the realm of the mind, because of course everything has consciousness. You can't separate that. All life is interdimensional, okay? And space-time and time-space only have so many dimensions because a dimension is a unit of measure. It's how you measure something. It's not, calling it a plane of existence or a realm. It's kind of not a proper way of describing these things. Maybe we could say realm or different density or different plane of existence, but that's a lot different than a dimension, okay? So if we're going to talk science, we need to properly define our descriptors we're using. And I think a lot of people throw that D word, that dimension out there without really defining it properly. He doesn't really define it here, and he says a lot of things that are weird in regard to dimensions, like timeline converging into another dimension close to us. Here's the thing. If we were to freeze this moment of now, that's all that would exist. There's no like dimension behind us or dimension in front of us that's going to like run into ours or something like that. It makes no sense. There's only one point in time that exists, that's now. The future is all probability. The past doesn't really exist anymore, and that's really all probability as well. Only thing that exists is now. So, and again, this is research. You can look into, Dewey B. Larson, as I've said. I'll link some stuff below in regards to that. But again, a lot of the information that's out there in the public domain is contradicting things he said. Then he goes on, I'm about minute 6, 7 here, says Project Pandora, talks about another Project Pandora, was to study this dimension. Now again, we have a time discrepancy, just like Project Looking Glass. Project Pandora was a project that was done back in the 1960s, and it was done by DARPA. It was done by DARPA on behalf of the U.S. government after the government found that the U.S. Embassy in the Soviet Union was being bombarded by gigahertz frequencies for like years on and off. Once the government found out about that, they tasked DARPA to do some research under Project Pandora about mind control via electromagnetic frequencies. And again, this was done back in the 60s. So if this dude claims to have worked on Project Looking Glass and Project Pandora, projects that were done decades ago, this dude has to be like at least 80, like maybe in the late 70s, assuming he would have been like maybe late 20s, early 30s at the youngest working on these projects. And in listening to the interview, he definitely didn't sound like he was in his late 70s or 80s. So the time discrepancies there, just really weird to me. Now, I understand that in the intelligence world, sometimes they'll call a super deep black project that they want to keep secret the same name as a much less secret unclassified project for plausible deniability reasons. That way, if an intelligence officer was asked about the name of this project, they could say, oh, you mean this benign one over here? And it's an easy way to, brush that project under the rug by calling them the same names. They sort of umbrella them like that. But this guy, John, he didn't talk about that. He didn't describe that. He just says that he worked for Project Looking Glass and Project Pandora, which were friggin' 40, 50 years ago. So that's really weird to me. That's one of the most weird things that stood out to me. He said, we don't know what the effect would be if we communicate with the next dimension. Again, it's a sort of a substanceless statement because we exist in multiple dimensions or realms, physical, non-physical, at the same time. And yeah, you can communicate through that next dimension with your self-awareness, with your consciousness, man. That's a huge thing he doesn't talk about in regards to Project Looking Glass is the consciousness component or the remote viewing that was said to be done in Project Looking Glass to try to view time. He doesn't mention that at all. So again, a lot of the science that's said here is odd. He says using electromagnetic waves to create a field that allows penetration into the next dimension. John was asked, how do they do this? How do they look or work with time? And he says using electromagnetic waves to create fields that allow penetration into the next dimension. Well, again, referencing back to the Dewey B. Larson physics, he was actually saying that electromagnetic waves are force fields, basically motion within the spiritual realm or the metaphysical realm. He called it the cosmic sector, material sector, cosmic sector. That's what he denoted the physical and metaphysical sectors. He called it material and cosmic. So he was saying that electromagnetic frequencies or waves are actually emanations from the cosmic sector. Which, just research Dewey B. Larson stuff. I'll link some stuff down below. It's pretty incredible, and it connects a lot of dots. But it doesn't vibe well with this. And then John goes on to say he doesn't think we have quantum computers, which some people may disagree with. He also states that Project Pandora, he said they started this at CERN, but they shut down CERN for energy to run computers for Project Pandora. Again, Project Pandora, the publicly available info on it was from back in the 60s, but assuming there's a modern Project Pandora that's running now, to say that they shut down CERN for energy to run computers for Project Pandora, well, number one, CERN is an organization. CERN is the organization that runs the Large Hadron Collider there over in Europe. So he didn't really verbally state that the correct way. They shut down the Large Hadron Collider is what he should have said. It would have made a lot more sense in the context of this statement. But he's also saying they shut down CERN to run energy for computers for Project Pandora. Just kind of makes no sense to me, especially if he mentioned zero-point energy research earlier. Like, why would they need to shut down that for energy to run? Not just that, but the Large Hadron Colliders over in Europe. You think they would shut down or divert energy from here in America if they were doing projects here in America. Anyway, moving on. About minute 8 or 9, he promotes some of Einstein's theories, says we can't travel faster than light yet, which, again, if you research into the black projects and the secret space programs, they already have electrogravitic technology. They've had it for 80 years. There's all sorts of documentaries out there and articles you can read and info, whistleblowers, alleged insiders that have talked about these things. And I would venture to guess that, yeah, surely some of those black projects that the Air Force or the Navy or the intelligence community has figured out how to move a craft faster than the speed of light. They figured out how to control gravity with electricity, and then, you can say, call them torsion drives or the mercury vortex engines or, whatever you want to call them. There's a lot of information out there. And people, we could say, that are in the know or were in the know, they're saying that, yeah, we have already solved that equation, how to move that fast. So the fact that he said that, odd to me. I figured, like, if he was in a deep, deep black program, something at the depth of, say, a Project Looking Glass type program, he should know those things. And also promoting Einstein's theories. We'll talk about that more in a sec. He goes on to a few minutes of a little more discussion on the dimension stuff, which is just odd to me, like I've been saying. Let's see here, about minute 14, 15, he said the deep state, he was saying basically the good guys don't have access to Project Looking Glass technology, which completely contradicts really everything we've been talking about in regards to Project Looking Glass for the last few weeks. Because if Q's mentioning it, we have all the future proofs past stuff. I mean, how much evidence do we have that, yeah, the good guys, the Alliance, they have access to these sorts of programs and technologies? That was a statement that didn't sit well with me. Then he said a lot of things were put in place under the Obama administration. Again, it wouldn't be called Project Looking Glass if we had a modern variant of the project. Moving on to minute 1819, he talks about working for a project cleaning up signals from space detected on satellite probes. So now we get into a lot of talk where he basically claims that he figured out, oh gosh, they called it all sorts of different things in this interview. They called it the universal frequency or the magical frequency. They were even calling it the voice of God. But apparently, this was a third project he worked on. He called it Project Deep Space Nine. He said the first one he worked on was Looking Glass, then Pandora, if he did. Then he said he worked on a project called Deep Space Nine, which was like a side project he was doing, or something to that effect. And that's when he said he was working on cleaning up signals from space detected on satellite probes. And he said he was recording the first areas of where the Big Bang occurred. And this was a huge WTF moment for me because he was promoting the Big Bang as if it was real. And this ties back into the Einstein thing I just mentioned a minute ago. Let me just say this. I have personally talked to people who have worked for secret think tanks before. Call them black projects. I have talked to people that have talked to people that have worked in black projects, classified programs before. The nomenclature they use and the way they talk, they never ever reference Einstein, nor the Big Bang. And in fact, the way they talk, and they understand that standard model physics, the stuff that's promoted in the mainstream, it's wrong. It's based off flawed foundations. And again, I feel like if this guy had actually worked at the levels that he says he worked with the projects, I mean with the technologies and the sciences that he said he worked with, he should know these things. Or at least something similar to them. I'm not saying he has to say the exact stuff that I've researched before, but promoting the Big Bang, promoting Einstein's flawed theories, I don't know. It just didn't sit well with me. So moving on into minute 22 now. He said the same background signal, or this background signal that he found in this project was the, quote, originator of the Big Bang. And then he said he finds this signal in everything now. It's a weak, large signal that's like a radioactive wave, and it triggered the Big Bang. Okay, so if there's this universal frequency, or like the frequency of God, or whatever they want to call it, that he found, what is that frequency? I got a lot of questions on this. Like, we know the Earth emits frequencies, the Schumann resonance. We can measure those. It's usually around 8 hertz. Sometimes it, bumps up pretty high, but it's measurable. We can measure the radiation that comes from the sun, those electromagnetic waves. We have different indexes to measure those sorts of things. If he figured out something this big, I feel like there should be more details about it, right? And then he moves on to talking about a couple of the individuals that apparently worked with him in these projects. He mentioned their names. He used the name Jamie and then the name Molly, I believe, as well. Then he even talked about Jamie and his pregnant wife. Don't know if Jamie and Molly are pseudonyms for people he knew. He didn't clarify that. But again, if this guy worked in super secret classified programs, is he going to use the names of people that he worked with in those programs? That seems kind of like self-doxing to me. I don't know if or what kind of NDAs he signed, if he signed any, but, I just don't think that would be something somebody would do if they were in the position that he claimed to be in. Moving on to minute 24, the signal was intelligent. It could affect you. From this, we understand how matter was brought into existence before the Big Bang. Matter was brought into existence before the Big Bang. He calls it the voice of God, the original word, the first word. No coincidence, the Bible says God created Earth 6,000 years ago, and that the oldest part of the universe where the signal is coming from, where the Big Bang originated, is 6,000 light years away. Okay, it just seems like he's trying to connect things that aren't really connecting and sort of making stuff up, going along with like mainstream dogma, but also religious dogmas here. So it's very odd. And again, if this guy has these wondrous answers, answering, where the Big Bang came from, and this magical frequency, and all these things, this voice of God, first word, share a little bit more about it with us, man. I'm curious. Moving on, minute 26. Turn the signal higher, you will witness miracles. Again, a lot of this stuff is like so airy that he was saying. It was like so up in the clouds. I couldn't really follow it. It was very difficult for me to get through this interview because there was just no substance to these claims. It did not sound scientific, even mystically scientific, which is when you get into the actual sciences of these programs, it's like sort of a mystical science. A lot of times they call it weird shit and fucking magic. these scientists in these programs, because that's sort of what it is. And the way he's talking, it just doesn't sound to me like he was involved in that. Let's see here. About minute 28 says the Big Bang is the blueprint for everything. He said that multiple times through this interview, like this frequency is just the blueprint for everything. And yeah, no doubt, there's an ether that exists. There's something that exists that connects all of us. All points in space and time are connected. But did he actually figure that out? I don't know. About minute 30, he starts talking about the Word of God, etc., etc. He keeps, he claimed to have been a minister or be a minister. So he takes that particular angle with this. But, a lot of people they're becoming emotionally attached to that angle. Because he's saying those things and using those terminologies in a very religious sense, then a lot of religious people out there are like, then he's real, he's true, because he's saying the same things that I like to hear, And that's not logical deduction. So we can't let that cloud our thinking. Minute 33, he said Obama started working on this wondrous frequency, I suppose. And minute 35, discussing mind control technology with these frequencies. This is the word of God they're using against us, he said. And then he gets on into talking Iran and into talking elites, these elites, and how they're using this supposed miracle frequency. He said Iran is using this frequency on their people, and he said they've been doing so since about 2008, because he was talking about leaders like John Brennan and John Kerry, and he said that they're trying to go to Iran now and like take back control of this technology to, I guess, use it in America or the Western countries or something like that. And, you know, that's a claim that sounds pretty out there. Minute 38, he says there's nothing wrong with 5G, which I wholeheartedly disagree with, because the problem with 5G is the freaking frequencies they use, period. And there's all sorts of information out there about how 5G is wrong. He said that they're going to piggyback this miracle frequency onto 5G technologies, and that's why they're trying to roll 5G out to us, is because of this like frequency they're going to piggyback onto that. He says nothing about 5G inherently being wrong itself, which, again, weird. I disagree with. Let's see here. He goes on to discussing minute 41. He says all the space references by the deep staters are referencing this frequency, which, again, I don't think is the case, being that there's plenty of other secret space programs and other technologies out there that there's a lot of occult space symbology to reference, or that they could reference with. Then TruReporting at minute 42, he asks a really good question. I liked this because he sort of pressed John here, and John didn't answer it too well, I don't think. So TruReporting said, if the deep state has Looking Glass, how did Hillary Clinton lose? That's a damn good question. And then John said, they can't look that far. Again, from the publicly available information we have on Project Looking Glass back in the 70s and 80s when they were working on it, they were able to remote view plenty of years into the future. And again, remote viewing, consciousness, something he didn't talk about in regards to that project. But there's a lot of information out there that says these things, and he didn't talk about that too much. He just said, oh, they can't look that far, and sort of brushed off the question. Let's see here. He said, getting into minute 44, he said, a lot of people want him dead. That's why he's using a ghost phone, apparently. But when I check his Twitter out, every single tweet he uses was from his Android phone. And I've also met some people that had previously worked in the intelligence community before, and they were basically like dark. They were on the run, trying to stay off grid. And if this guy, if people want him dead, I'm wondering why he has a Twitter account in the first place and posts on it. You know, that can be geotagged and whatnot. It's, you know, weird things. Moving on here. Let's see, minute 49. What I've learned over the last few days, this is a biggie. This is where he starts going into talking about the deep state folk trying to gain control of these technologies. And this, I think, is what freaked a lot of people out, because I don't think a lot of people really thought this through. He said, what I've learned over the last few days is John Brennan, who I personally briefed on this stuff many times. That was a very weird line. That sort of tells us, according to his claims, that he might have been in the CIA. I mean, in the very first few minutes, he mentioned he was in the civilian intelligence realm, i.e. CIA. And I'm not saying all people in the CIA are bad apples, but they also do say once agency, always agency. So, you know, I don't know what motive or who this John guy might be, but who knows? Maybe he could be tasked to claim to be an insider and spread a bunch of disinformation out there to, I don't know, confuse people or scare people. But anyway, he said that John Brennan and John Kerry, John Brennan, who he briefed many times, are negotiating with Iran to bring part of this technology back. They're going to use this technology against Republican senators to turn them against the president, also use against the president. And then progressing on from this minute, there's just a lot of fear porn, I'll be honest. There is a lot of fear porn where he just continuously says that, you know, this is like the biggest thing ever, even moving on to about the hour, a little past the hour mark. He says this is bigger than Project Bluebeam, and you know, I think a lot of information out there about Project Bluebeam, the alien false flag stuff, I think that is fear porn disinformation that's purposely put out there by rogue intel, maybe to scare people. A lot of that sounds like this, quite frankly. He continues to say this frequency is the blueprint to everything. It's the blueprint to everything. The bad guys are trying to use it to mind control us. He keeps saying there's nothing you can do to stop it. Even the military will be mind controlled to come after us, and everybody's going to think it's their thoughts, etc., etc. This is the word of God. It permeates everything, but they're taking shards of it and to control us. And the way he speaks is as if we don't have any chance. At hour 1, minute 21, he says, are they going to have any free will at all? He talks about our free will being taken away, as if this technology takes our free will away. And that's not the case. Nothing can take our free will away at all, period. Okay? You're the only person that can take your free will away with your own mind because you don't think you have it. But even if the deep state got in control of some crazy frequency technologies, you still have a free will, okay? Even if, the thoughts in your head aren't really yours, you have a free will. And I just think a lot of, towards the end of that interview, was just fear porn stuff that didn't make sense. And there's some other things there, but I think I've gone on long enough in this video, and it's sort of not important. So that's just a lot of questions I have. I pretty much went through the whole interview by now, all the claims I heard that were off to me, and I hope that I was able to give you enough of at least what's going on in my head or information that's out there in the public domain to help you discern these statements. There were some statements he made where I was like, okay, that's, I could believe that. But there are red flags. And if the red flags are there, they have to be there. You can't just ignore them. That's not doing proper due diligence or discernment. So that's all the red flags I saw. Maybe you can rewatch the interview and maybe research some of the other things I was talking about and come to your own conclusions about it. But those are just my conclusions, folks. So the lesson here is to, anytime you come across some seemingly mind-blowing information, take a minute, study it, try to corroborate it. Don't just share it like it's true, because that's how fake stuff goes viral and confuses everybody, okay? And that's what got us into this mess right here. That's what's keeping us in this mess right here, all right? So let's hone those discernment caps, guys. The truth is what it is. You either bend to its will or you live a lie. That's all for this one. See you soon.